Right. You wanted the lowdown on von Hippel-Lindau disease. So today we're going deep, deep, deep into VHL. Using this medical text we have here, all about the features and the diagnosis and management. Think of it like your shortcut to becoming a VHL expert.
We'll break it all down, go beyond just the facts, so you really understand, what VHL is, why it matters, and what to look out for.
Okay, perfect. So what is VHL? The source mentions it's not just like a disease, it's a syndrome. What's the difference?
Right, that's a great question. It is a syndrome, and that basically means it's like a group of symptoms that are all caused by the same underlying issue. In VHL, the underlying issue is a mutation in a gene called the VHL gene, and this one little gene glitch can cause a whole bunch of different tumors in different parts of your body.
So it's not like you get like one specific tumor if you have VHL.
Exactly. It's more like you're predisposed to developing multiple tumors over time. And depending on which types are most likely, we classify VHL into two main types, type 1 and type 2.
Okay. So are these types based on like where the tumors pop up?
It's less about the location and more about the probability of certain tumors. The key difference between type 1 and type 2 is how likely someone is to develop a pheochromocytoma, which is a tumor in the adrenal glands.
So wait, so does that mean that some people with VHL might not get all the same types of tumors?
Exactly. And it gets even more complex than that because there are actually subtypes within type 2 based on the risks of other specific tumors.
Wow, so VHL really keeps doctors on their toes, huh?
Oh, yeah. It's a really complex and always changing field. But that's exactly why it's so important to understand the specific types of tumors that are associated with VHL.
All right, so let's get into this tumor lineup then. I am ready to take some notes. What are some of the most common tumors we should know about?
Okay, well, we can't talk about VHL without talking about hemangioblastomas. They are the most frequent tumor in folks with VHL.
And the source says that these are benign, but they can still cause issues. I mean, how can a benign tumor be a problem?
Yeah, so you got to think of it like even if you have something that's harmless, like a lump, if it's pressing on something that's really vital, it can cause problems. So imagine you have a hemangioblastoma that's growing in your cerebellum.
Right.
Which is the part of your brain that's responsible for your balance. So it might not be cancerous, but it could definitely throw you off your feet.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So location matters a lot, even for those benign tumors. What else should we be aware of?
Okay, so next on the list is retinal capillary hemangioblastomas. We'll call those RCHs for short. And these are tumors that affect the eyes, specifically the retina.
So these are the ones that can impact vision.
Exactly. And these often appear in childhood. So that makes early detection really crucial. Kids might not even realize the vision is changing. So regular eye exams are an absolute must for anyone with VHL, even from a young age.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kids might not even be able to articulate what's going on. So brain tumors, eye tumors. What else is on the list?
Well, VHL can also affect the kidneys. Renal cell carcinomas, or RCCs, are a major concern.
And these are the ones that could be cancerous, right? That makes them a lot scarier than those benign tumors we were talking about.
Absolutely. RCCs are the most serious type of tumor associated with VHL, and they need to be caught and treated as early as possible. And it's interesting. The predominant type of RCC that we find in VHL is called clear cell RCC. It's almost like the kidneys are particularly vulnerable in this syndrome.
That's not just about having tumors, it's about what kind of tumor it is.
Exactly. Each type comes with its own set of risks and requires specific approach to monitoring and treatment.
Okay, so we've covered tumors in the brain, the eyes, kidneys. Is there anywhere VHL doesn't affect? I'm starting to get a little worried about all these tumors.
We are going to break down each of these in a lot more detail and talk about the ways that they're managed. But you're right. VHL can affect a lot of different organs. So, for instance, remember those pheochromocytomas we talked about earlier?
Yeah, the ones that differentiate between type 1 and type 2.
Those are the ones. So those are found in the adrenal glands. And they can be a bit tricky because they often don't cause the typical symptoms you might expect. And they can also mess with your hormones in subtle ways, sometimes leading to high blood pressure.
So they're kind of like these silent troublemakers, just like affecting things behind the scenes.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, and it really makes regular screening all that more important, especially because folks with VHL might not experience those classic warning signs.
Okay. This is a lot to take in already,
Mm-hmm.
and we've only just scratched the surface.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's so many things to be aware of with VHL.
You're right. It is a complex syndrome, but don't worry. We're going to unpack it all step by step. Now let's move on to a couple of rarer tumors that are associated with VHL. Endolymphatic sac tumors, or ELSTs.
LSTs, what do those affect?
So these are tumors that are found near your inner ear, and they can impact both hearing and balance. Imagine you have this tumor growing near your inner ear. It can really throw off your sense of balance and your hearing and be really disorienting.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary thought. It makes me think about, the emotional impact of a VHL diagnosis. It must be so overwhelming to know that you're susceptible to all these different types of tumors.
You're absolutely right. The emotional and psychological aspects of VHL are just as important as the physical ones, and we will definitely delve into that later on.
Good to know. So we've covered tumors in the brain, eyes, kidneys, adrenal glands, and now near the ear. Is there anywhere else VHL can strike?
Well, there's still the pancreas. VHL can cause a variety of pancreatic tumors, both benign and potentially malignant, and they often need to be monitored for growth and any concerning symptoms.
Okay, so even the pancreas isn't off limits. This really drives home the point that, VHL isn't just one disease. It's this whole cascade of potential issues.
Yeah, you're getting it. And then there's one more tumor type to mention, although it's usually less of a concern. Have you ever heard of papillary cystadenomas?
I can't say that I have. Are those the scary ones?
Not at all. These are benign tumors that are usually asymptomatic and rarely need treatment. They can be found in the epididymis in men and the broad ligament in women.
So even the reproductive organs can be affected. It's incredible how VHL can impact these seemingly unrelated parts of the body.
It is fascinating, isn't it? It really underscores how interconnected our bodies are and how a single gene can have these really widespread effects.
Yeah. Makes me think about, my own genetic makeup. What potential quirks might be lurking in there?
Yeah. It's a natural reaction. And it highlights why genetic counseling is so important for people with VHL and their families.
Okay. We'll definitely have to dive into that later. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's get back to the basics. You mentioned that VHL is caused by a mutation in the VHL gene. Can you break that down a little more? Like, what does that mean for somebody to have this mutation?
Sure. So essentially, it means that the instructions that are coded in their VHL gene are a bit garbled. This gene is responsible for making a protein that helps regulate cell growth and division. And when that gene is mutated, that protein doesn't function properly, and cells can start to grow uncontrollably, which leads to the formation of tumors.
So it's like a glitch in the body's natural control system for cell growth.
That's a great analogy. And because this glitch is in the genes, it can be passed down through families.
Which is why we often hear about VHL running in families.
Exactly. And it follows a pattern called autosomal dominant inheritance.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down
a
little bit more for me. What does autosomal dominant inheritance actually mean in practical terms?
Okay, so imagine this. Every person has 2 copies of each gene, one inherited from their mother and one from their father. In autosomal dominant inheritance, you only need 1 copy of the mutated gene to develop the condition.
So if one parent has the VHL gene mutation, what are the chances their child will inherit it?
It's a 50-50 chance with each pregnancy.
So essentially a coin toss. That doesn't seem very fair.
Yeah. Unfortunately, genetics isn't always fair. But understanding these odds is really crucial for families facing VHL.
Yeah, I can imagine. It would be a lot to process.
Yeah.
Knowing that there's a 50% chance you might pass this on to your children.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've established that VHL can run in families, but is it always inherited? Are there ever cases where someone develops VHL even if their parents don't have it?
That's a great question, and it brings us to something called de novo mutations.
De novo mutations.
Yeah.
That sounds intriguing.
It's a bit of a mouthful, I know, but it's a really fascinating concept. Basically, it means that the VHL gene mutation happens spontaneously in the child, even though neither parent carries it.
Wow. So it's not always a direct inheritance. It can just, appear out of the blue.
Not as common as inherited mutations, but it does happen, and it highlights how complex genetics can be.
Yeah, this is all really fascinating, but it's also, a lot to wrap my head around. It's like
Yeah.
we've opened Pandora's box of genetic complexities. I'm starting to understand why you said VHL keeps doctors on their toes.
It definitely requires a multifaceted approach to understanding and managing. But the good news is that with all the advancements in genetics
Yeah.
and a growing awareness of VHL, we're better equipped than ever to help individuals and families navigate this journey.
That's reassuring to hear. So before we move on to the nitty-gritty of diagnosis and management, let's take a step back and talk about what it's actually like to live with VHL. We've covered all the potential tumor types, but what does that actually mean for someone's day-to-day life?
That's an important question, and it's where the human side of VHL really comes into focus. Living with VHL means living with uncertainty. It means knowing that you're at risk for developing tumors, and it means committing to a lifelong journey of monitoring and management.
So it's not just about, like, treating tumors as they arise. It's about constantly being on the lookout for new ones.
Exactly. Lifelong surveillance is key,
Yeah.
and it involves regular checkups, scans, and screenings to catch any potential problems early. And that can take a toll, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, I can imagine it'd be quite stressful. Always wondering if something new is going to pop up.
It can be. But there are also, ways to cope and find support connecting with others who are going through similar experiences, whether it's through support groups or online communities, can be incredibly helpful.
It's like that saying, a problem shared is a problem halved.
Exactly. Knowing that you're not alone in this journey can make a world of difference. We'll talk more about the support systems that are available for people with VHL a little bit later. But for now, let's shift gears and delve into the specifics of how VHL is diagnosed.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. How do doctors actually figure out if somebody has VHL?
Well, in the past, diagnosis relied heavily on identifying multiple VHL-associated tumors. So if a doctor saw more than one, it was a pretty strong indication of VHL.
So it's all about the tumor count. More tumors, more likely the diagnosis.
That was the general approach. But thankfully, things have evolved. With the advancements in genetic testing, we can actually pinpoint a germline mutation in the VHL gene, and that has become the gold standard for diagnosis.
No more waiting around for multiple tumors to appear.
Not necessarily. If someone has a strong family history of VHL, genetic testing might be done, even before any tumors are present.
Wow, that's amazing. Early detection can make such a difference.
You're absolutely right. And even if someone has just one characteristic VHL-related tumor, they'll likely undergo genetic testing to confirm the diagnosis.
That makes sense. Catching it early is key. But what about those rare cases where someone has all the signs of VHL, but the genetic test comes back negative? What's going on there?
That's when things get a little more complicated. And it might involve something called somatic mosaicism.
Somatic mosaicism. That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
It is a bit of a mouthful, but it's actually a fascinating concept. Basically what it means is that the mutation happens during embryonic development after the egg has been fertilized. So some cells end up with the mutation and some don't.
So it's like having two sets of blueprints in your body. Some cells with the mutation, some without.
Exactly. And that's where it gets tricky for diagnosis. Because if the blood cells don't carry the mutation, a standard genetic test using a blood sample might miss it, even though the person actually has VHL.
So it's possible to have VHL, but the standard test might not catch it.
It's definitely something to be aware of. Doctors will consider the possibility of mosaicism if someone has the VHL symptoms, but a negative genetic test. And they might then do genetic testing on a tumor sample instead.
So there are ways to work around those genetic quirks. What happens if someone is diagnosed with VHL, even if it's through, mosaicism? What kind of guidance do they get?
Well, genetic counseling is essential. It helps patients and their families understand, all of the implications of a VHL diagnosis. They learn about the risks, the inheritance patterns, and what it means for their future and their family's future.
Like having a roadmap.
Yeah.
For navigating VHL.
Precisely. And it's especially important for folks with mosaicism because the risk of passing on that VHL mutation to their children can be as high as 50%, even though they themselves might not show strong symptoms.
Wow, that's a lot to process, both for the person who's diagnosed and their loved ones. I can imagine it's just a whole mix of emotions.
Absolutely. And then, there's another layer to consider. Pregnancy.
How does VHL play into that?
If one parent has VHL, there are options to find out if the fetus has inherited that gene mutation.
So you can know before the baby is born?
Yes, through prenatal testing.
Yeah.
It allows parents to prepare, and some couples might make difficult decisions based on the results.
Yeah, I can see how that could be both empowering and emotionally challenging.
It is. But it's not just about the baby's genetic makeup. Pregnancy itself can actually affect VHL.
Really? In what way?
Some women, VHL tumors, especially those in the brain, eyes, or spinal cord, can actually grow more rapidly during pregnancy.
Oh, that's definitely not good news.
It's definitely something to monitor closely. Regular checkups are vital. And in some cases, doctors might recommend a C-section delivery to minimize stress on the brain.
I bet those 9 months can be pretty anxiety-inducing for a woman with VHL.
You're not wrong. And then there's the issue of, those pheochromocytomas.
Oh, yeah. Those adrenal gland tumors.
Yes, those. So they can pose serious risks during pregnancy and delivery because of their impact on hormones and blood pressure. So monitoring for pheochromocytomas throughout pregnancy is crucial.
Pregnancy with VHL is definitely a high-stakes situation.
It is, but with careful monitoring, informed decision-making, and the right support, it's definitely possible to navigate those challenges.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. The types of tumors, the complexities of genetics, and the considerations during pregnancy. But before we move on, I want to make sure our listeners are walking away with a clear understanding of the most important things we've discussed so far.
Absolutely. I think 3 key takeaways are essential for anyone trying to understand VHL. First, early detection is crucial, whether it's through genetic testing or regular screenings. Finding tumors early dramatically improves the chances of successful treatment and management.
Yeah. Early detection seems to be a recurring theme with VHL.
It really is. The second key takeaway is that genetic counseling is invaluable. It can help individuals and families understand their risk, make informed decisions about family planning, and access the support they need.
And finally,
remember that you're not alone in this journey. There are communities, both online and in person, dedicated to supporting people with VHL and their families.
Great points all around. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how doctors manage VHL over a person's lifetime, the different treatment options that are available, and the promising new therapies that are on the horizon. So stay tuned.
So we were just talking about early detection and genetic counseling, and now let's shift gears a bit and talk about how doctors actually manage VHL over a person's lifetime.
Yeah, you mentioned lifelong surveillance earlier. What does that actually look like?
Well, it's all about staying ahead of the game. You can kind of think of it like a carefully choreographed dance where we're monitoring those areas where VHL tumors tend to appear, just looking for any signs of trouble.
So it's not about waiting for symptoms, but like actively searching for potential issues.
Exactly. And it starts early. Think regular eye exams from infancy even to catch those retinal angiomas we were discussing.
Wow, even babies with VHL need to see an eye doctor.
Absolutely. And as kids grow, the monitoring kind of expands to include regular physical exams, blood pressure checks, hearing tests. It's a whole body approach to surveillance.
Wow, that sounds pretty intense.
It's definitely a commitment. And then once a child hits their teens, imaging enters the picture. So MRIs of the brain and spinal cord are done pretty regularly to check for
hemangioblastomas.
Those benign brain and spinal cord tumors, right? Yes, those. And we can't forget about the kidneys. So imaging of the kidneys, usually with MRIs or CT scans, is done annually to look for signs of renal cell carcinoma.
Those are the ones that can be cancerous, right? The stakes seem a lot higher with those.
Yeah, they are. And of course, we're also keeping a close eye on those tricky pheochromocytomas with regular testing.
It's like a constant game of whack-a-mole, trying to catch these tumors before they cause problems.
Yeah, that's a pretty vivid analogy. The frequency of all these tests and scans may vary depending on individual risk factors and family history, but the goal remains the same: early detection.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot for somebody to manage, like on their own. Are there any resources to help folks with VHL stay on top of all this?
Absolutely. Organizations like the VHL Family Alliance provide a ton of information, support, and guidance. They even have medical advisory boards with experts who can provide the latest information about surveillance protocols and treatment options.
So it's like having a whole team of experts in your corner.
That's the idea. No. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the financial burden, lifelong monitoring, and potential treatments can add up pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
It is. But fortunately, a lot of countries have programs to help patients manage the costs of complex genetic conditions like VHL.
Oh, so there is help available.
Yes. It's definitely worth researching and reaching out for assistance.
Now, let's move on to the treatments themselves.
Okay, yeah. Let's unpack that. What happens if a tumor is found? What are the treatment options?
Well, like most things with VHL, it depends. The type of tumor, its size, location, the individual's overall health, all of these play a role in determining the best course of action.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach?
Not with VHL. It's highly individualized. Let's start with hemangioblastomas, those benign ones in the brain and spinal cord.
Okay. What's the typical approach for those? Often, it involves surgery to remove them, however, if they're small, and not causing any symptoms. We might opt for I'll watch and wait approach with with regular scans.
Kind of a balancing act between intervening and monitoring.
Exactly. The good news is that if surgery is needed, it's usually very successful in removing those types of tumors.
Yeah, good to hear. What about those retinal capillary hemangioblastomas, the RCHs we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
How are those typically treated?
Treatment for RCHs typically involves either laser therapy or cryotherapy. Both of those techniques are effective in destroying the tumors while preserving vision.
So these are like less invasive procedures than brain surgery.
Yes, much less invasive. And now for the more serious ones, the renal cell carcinomas, treatment for RCCs and VHL has actually seen a pretty significant shift in recent years.
What's changed?
Well, in the past, radical nephrectomy, which involves removing the entire kidney, was the go-to treatment.
That sounds incredibly drastic.
It is, thankfully. The focus now is on preserving as much kidney function as possible with nephron-sparing approaches.
Nephron-sparing. What does that entail?
It means removing only the tumor while leaving as much of the healthy kidney tissue as possible. Techniques like partial nephrectomy, cryoablation, and radiofrequency ablation are all examples of nephron-sparing approaches.
So there are options to avoid removing the entire kidney.
Yes, and the benefits are huge. Preserving kidney function can make a world of difference in someone's quality of life.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. What about those hormone-disrupting pheochromocytomas? How are those treated?
Surgery is the gold standard for pheochromocytomas. It's the most effective way to remove the tumor and get those hormone levels back in check.
But we talked about how those tumors can be, kind of sneaky and difficult to detect. How do doctors actually find them to treat them?
It's a bit like detective work. Doctors use a combination of imaging techniques and biochemical testing, like specialized scans and blood or urine tests to pinpoint the tumor's location.
So it's like a high-tech treasure hunt for those hidden tumors?
You could say that.
We've talked a lot about surgery as a treatment option for VHL.
Yeah.
Are there any there are therapies
on the horizon? That's a great question. And it's where the future of VHL treatment gets really exciting. Researchers are exploring what are called targeted therapies.
Mm-hmm.
And these are drugs that specifically block the growth of the blood vessels that feed tumors.
So it's like cutting off the tumor supply line.
Exactly. And these targeted therapies hold great promise for treating some of the more challenging VHL tumors. And they might even help prevent new tumors from forming.
That sounds almost too good to be true.
I know, right?
So we've discussed how VHL is, monitored, managed, and treated. And it's clear that VHL is complex.
Yeah.
But with knowledge and proactive management, it seems like people can live, full and meaningful lives.
Absolutely. And it's important to emphasize that while VHL does present, some unique challenges, it also highlights the incredible resilience of the human body and the power of science to improve lives.
Yeah, what a great point. Now, what's the most important message you want our listener to take away from all of this information about VHL?
The key message is that VHL is manageable with early detection, regular monitoring, and expert care. Individuals with VHL can live long, healthy lives. It's all about being informed, proactive, and never losing hope.
That's such a powerful message of hope. Now, where can people go to learn more about VHL? and connect with others who are going through similar experiences.
The VHL Family Alliance is an excellent resource. They offer a wealth of information on our website and host events and support groups.
It's like a one-stop shop for all things VHL.
Exactly. They have resources for patients, families, caregivers, healthcare professionals. They're a fantastic source of support and information. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive into VHL, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Go for it. I'm all ears.
If you, or someone you love, is diagnosed with VHL, remember this: knowledge is power. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Seek out information, connect with others, and lean on those support systems that are available.
That's such valuable advice. Knowing what you're facing and having the right tools and support can make all the difference in the world. That's really empowering. It's not about being passive, right? It's about really taking control.
Exactly. Being informed, connected, and proactive.
Okay. This has been such an incredible deep dive into VHL. I feel like we've learned so much about this really complex and often overlooked syndrome. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to highlight about VHL? Any final piece of wisdom to share?
Yeah, I think one thing that often gets overlooked is the power of research. VHL is a relatively rare condition, but there's a lot of groundbreaking research happening right now that's leading to new discoveries and potential treatments.
So there's hope for even more effective ways to manage VHL in the future.
Absolutely. And I encourage everyone, whether they're directly affected by VHL or not, to support organizations that fund research into rare diseases. It's through research that we're going to continue to unlock new possibilities and improve the lives of those living with VHL.
Yeah, that's a great point. Research is the engine of progress, right? And it's often underfunded.
Yeah.
Especially for those rare diseases.
Exactly. Now, before we go, I do want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the emotional and psychological impact of living with VHL.
Yes.
It's such an important aspect, and we haven't really explored it in depth yet. Yeah. Living with a chronic condition like VHL can be a real roller coaster of emotions. There's the initial shock of diagnosis, the anxiety of constant monitoring, and the uncertainty of what the future holds.
Yeah. And each new tumor discovery, that must be incredibly unsettling.
It can be. That's why it's so important for folks with VHL to have a really strong support system in place. Talking to therapists, joining support groups, connecting with others who understand what they're going through. All of these connections can make such a difference in coping with the emotional challenges of VHL.
Yeah, it's about having a safe space to process those feelings.
Yeah.
And knowing that you're not alone.
Exactly. Remember, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, and it's okay to celebrate the victories, big and small.
What a beautiful sentiment. I think that's a perfect note to end on. This deep dive into VHL has been a real eye-opening experience, and I hope our listener feels empowered with knowledge and a sense of hope.
I hope so too. VHL is challenging, but it's manageable with the right information, support, and a proactive approach. Individuals with VHL can live full and fulfilling lives.
So true. And remember, knowledge is power. If you are looking to learn more about VHL or connect with others, check out the resources in our show notes, including information about the VHL Family Alliance.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.
And remember, keep diving deep into the knowledge that matters most to you.